Hi, everybody. So today I'm going to talk about an issue which I think is going to bite us all in the arse, which is that we need to rethink how we train engineers and grow them in this new age of AI. And I appreciate there's been a lot of AI content at the conference, but genuinely there was even more in the CFPs, trust me. So we have tried to balance it out. As we've said, I'm Meri Williams. I'm a CTO by day. I am currently at Pleo. I was previously at Monzo and Moo and M&S.com and Helix and places like that. And I have ADHD and it kind of shows in my career. So I do a bunch of other things. I chair lead dev, I'm an advisor to Skillawhale, I'm on Flagstone's board, and I run a tiny charity on the side as well in South Africa. But this conference very genuinely is one of the things that I'm most proud of in my career. And it's been a running joke for a decade that I helped create the conference I most wanted to have exist and most wanted to speak at, and never got to frickin' speak at it. So this is the day that we changed that. So AI coding is changing things. I think we all know that. But the thing that's been unsettling me is AI coding assistants are often referred to as like a junior engineer, where they're capable of doing the work that juniors previously did. But if AI does the junior engineer work, then what happens to junior engineers or associates, depending on what you call them? Some people say we just don't need them anymore. There was a study from Ravio that came out just recently that said hiring rates for starter jobs in the field are down 73.4%. Not limited to Europe and not limited to the tech industry. Graduate roles, entry-level roles have just been decimated is not the right word, because decimated means reduced by 10. It's been reduced by 75%. That's ridiculous. I find it funny that people seem to imagine that seniors spring from, fully formed from somewhere, like Minerva did from Jupiter's forehead. But luckily, we're not alone in this problem. I went and spoke to a bunch of people in law who are finding this a very interesting challenge. They've had work that used to be done by paralegals is being done by AI now. They've had some scary stories, too, about hallucinations being introduced into court records, some lawyers being censured or even struck off because they lied to the court because they didn't realize something was a hallucination. And they worry about what it means that so much paralegal work can be done this way because, like for us, where associate or junior engineers become senior engineers, paralegals become lawyers. It's a great feeder program for law as a profession. I also talked to my wife, who's an architect, like a real one. She builds hospitals. It's always entertaining where I have to explain that she's a real one. And they had a very similar version of this problem even before AI. So the generation that taught her how to be an architect used to literally still draft things by hand. Her generation did everything in computer-aided design. The generation below her does everything in 3D modeling. And what that has meant is the amount of time that they spend manually making changes and getting to know really intimately what works and doesn't work in a building has changed massively, because also the risk or cost of being wrong has changed massively. Originally, when you were drafting by hand, you were very, very sure you were getting it right, because you might spend hours on a plan or an elevation and really not want to have to start that over by making one mistake. In CAD, they still had to change the plans and the elevations manually when they made changes to the building. Now with 3D modeling, you make the change once and it's done. And they just take pictures of the 3D model from above and the side to get those plans and elevations. And so there's some really interesting other industries that are having problems similar to us that we can learn from. And one of my real bugbears about the tech industry is that we act like we have to figure everything out ourselves. Like we started over with 1920s style management and we iterated our way from there. There's 100 years of management science. And I know that some of you might have opinions about management science, but they still did proper research, and they still found a load of stuff out that we could have just learned from rather than iterating our way through it. And so for this challenge, I talked to a load of other industries, tried to understand how they're approaching training people differently, whether because of AI or other factors. And then I also interviewed a bunch of people from associate engineers, which is what we call them at Pleo, all the way up to principal engineers, to understand what they thought was going to change in this new world. And everybody agreed on what traditional sort of associate work looked like. And this is actually really interesting because it's very similar to what the same answers were for law and for architecture. People start out doing well-scoped and well-defined tasks, and they often do similar work repeatedly. For us, there's a lot of pairing with other engineers. You see a very similar thing, they just don't call it pairing in other industries. There's clear and rapid feedback in the form of tests passing or failing, pull request reviews, and pairing with other engineers. What everybody described as a lot of looking for answers on Google and Stack Overflow and learning what to trust and what not. And then also learning when to struggle a bit versus just immediately asking for help. And that piece of learning how long to try on your own versus immediately getting help was a common thread amongst everybody. And I find this really interesting because there's this definition of a thing called deliberate practice, which is the best form of practice. And deliberate practice is defined as something where you have to be motivated to attend to the task, so you're willing to put effort in. The design of the task takes into account your pre-existing knowledge so that it can be correctly understood after a brief period of instruction. You receive immediate informative feedback, knowledge of the results of your performance, and you repeatedly perform the same or similar tasks. And so this is quite hard to remember. It's very academic, I appreciate. But I like to think of this like video game design. Great games are motivational because they're fun. They take into account what you know about the world already, and they often have real-world analogs in how they work. You get immediate informative feedback. Games are brilliant at immediate informative feedback. You die, or you win the race, or your team scores a goal, or whatever else, right? And you definitely repeatedly perform the same or similar tasks. There are 3 models of deliberate practice. The sports model is like training your muscles so that when you have to use them on the rugby pitch, you're effective. So you're not doing the thing that you do for the performance, but you're doing something that helps you be good at it. The chess model, where you look at what somebody who's already brilliant at it does, and then try to copy them or figure out what you would do in their situation. And the music model, which is to break things into pieces and then rehearse them individually and slowly piece them together into a full performance. And in tech, we really lucked into work for junior engineers that's probably accidentally, if we're honest, designed to be effective, deliberate practice. It's got the right level of challenge, it's got the right level of feedback, it's repetitive but not boringly so, hopefully, and they're learning all the time. And in addition to that definition of deliberate practice, the other thing from the science of learning that's useful to know is that all humans go through a particular process when developing new skills. We start off unconsciously incompetent. You don't know how to drive, you don't even know what the gear stick or the steering wheel is for. Okay? You become consciously incompetent. So imagine a learner driver, they're grinding the gears, they forget to indicate, they know what they're doing wrong, but they're still doing it wrong. You become consciously competent. Imagine someone who's just passed their test. They're driving correctly, but they're taking all of their energy to do it. And then think of, and I appreciate, I'm using a driving analogy in London, which I haven't worked out how to make this work for the tube yet. If anybody's got ideas, see me after. But I think you get where I'm going. And then you end up unconsciously competent. I'm sure you've had the experience of arriving at work and having no memory of the drive there or your journey there. You must have indicated, changed lanes, accelerated, braked. You've done a whole bunch of things because you got there and nobody died. But you automatically did it right. You weren't actively thinking about all of those things as you did them. And that's what unconscious competence looks like. As an aside, that's why sometimes your most expert engineers suck at teaching. They automatically know what to do. They get it right unconsciously. And so when they're asked, nobody wants to go, I don't know, the hindbrain decided. And so what do? They lie. It's very benevolent. They're not meaning to lead you astray. But because they're unconsciously competent, they don't actually actively decide on some of those design decisions or approaches to the problem or anything else. They're doing it automatically. This is why sometimes having your mid-level engineers mentor your juniors or your associates can work better, because they're just a few steps ahead. They're still consciously competent. They're actively thinking about how to get it right. They're not just automatically doing it. And so on this journey in the past, engineers learned a lot of stuff by osmosis or for free, because we lucked into this structure of work that just worked brilliantly for teaching people. And there's a bunch of stuff that everybody I interviewed agreed was important for junior engineers to learn. Foundations, how things fit together, what a database is, what the cloud is, spoiler alert, other people's computers. They need to learn smells, was the description everybody gave me. You know, telltale signs that things are going to go wrong. What's going to make this go wrong in production? They need debugging skills. They need refactoring skills to actually fix some of the stuff that's wrong. And then they need to learn how to learn and learn to keep up. Because if nothing else, change is constant in technology. You can't go to university, do 3 years, and never learn anything technical again. I mean, you can try, but I don't think you're going to have a fantastically successful career. And so with AI coding, are they going to get as much for free? I think they're definitely not. I've said probably not, but I've become more certain since I wrote these slides on Saturday. So what do we need to do differently? I think we have to adapt to this new reality. We need to teach foundations much more actively, because they're not going to practice in the same way that we got to. They're not going to get to do all of these low-level, well-defined tasks that are challenging, but with great feedback and great learning and repetition. They're probably going to be a bit more tech-leady a lot earlier in their career, because they're going to have AI assistants that can take tasks and work on them. We're already seeing that our associates at Pleo can do much bigger stories on their own and bigger pieces of work on their own than they used to be able to just a year ago. And so we need to teach those foundations more actively, and then we need to add some additional skills that are now required. And so it's still really important for juniors to learn foundations and smells and debugging and refactoring and how to learn. But some of the way they do those things and the way they learn those things is probably going to look very different to how it did for us, and how it did for the generation below us, depending on how long you've been in this game. There's a bunch of additional skills needed, though. Critical thinking, which everybody agrees on, but nobody can tell me how we should teach it. And again, I think that there are probably philosophy professors who know, but we're not great at talking to them right now. And so we need to teach people to constantly question why, to really want to understand why something works, why something's broken, what's going on under the hood, and where the information is coming from. We need to teach people how to get the most out of AI, whether that's prompt engineering or whatever buzzword we come up with next to describe this. Telling something to do something in an effective way is important. We have had successive waves of improvements in technology, greater and greater abstraction of programming languages, everything else. And we still can't write a frickin' ticket in Jira well enough for AI to just pick it up and work on it. Let's be honest here, right? Somebody was telling me the other day that you can now do that. You can connect AI agents into your Jira backlog, and they can just pick up the work and do it. It took me 10 minutes to stop laughing. I'm from an AI background originally. I studied under Dr. Joanne Bryson, so I have strong opinions about all the things people think LLMs can do that they definitely frickin' can't. The one thing that nobody had thought of until I asked the question, but when I asked it, everybody agreed, was that engineers coming up now are going to have to do code review so much earlier than we did in our careers. Who got to review code as a junior? A few of you. Who had to wait until they were a mid-level before anybody trusted them to review anybody else's code? Yeah, right? Who had to wait till they were senior? People who will not admit it. Okay, good. And so we're going to have to teach code review in a much better way and a much faster way and a much earlier point in people's careers. And we're going to have to work on systems thinking much earlier as well. Previously, you could get away with spending your first few years as an engineer only focused on coding the thing right in front of you. If you're working on stories already as an entry-level engineer, rather than just on subtasks or similar, you're going to have to understand how things fit together much earlier as well. One of the things that was really interesting, none of the seniors or principals that I spoke to expected this, but every associate engineer that I spoke to did this, is that all of the associates use AI not just to produce code, but to help them think through problems and to help them understand parts of the code, how it works, what it's doing, why it's doing it. And that sounds both like really interesting and really dangerous to me, so I dug into it quite a lot. And one of them said that they were waiting for the coding assistant that they use to get angry with them for asking the same question over and over again. But it never did. AI is an endlessly patient mentor. And so one of the things that we're going to have to watch out for is whether we don't coach and mentor as much as we can and should be doing, because they're getting some of that information, some of that guidance from somewhere else. And it might not have the wisdom that we have. So what do we need to learn to do differently in this new age? What advice do we need to give our senior engineers, our engineering managers, our staff and principal engineers? How do we have to change what we do in order to adapt to this? I collected a bunch of advice for seniors. The first was just to learn how to teach. Remember that unconscious competence thing? If you have been in this game a long time, you might be automatically doing a load of things that you can't explain well anymore. Being an expert doesn't mean you can't teach. It just means you have to much more actively decide to teach and learn those skills. And so being a good engineer just isn't enough anymore. You're going to have to learn about the different modes of deliberate practice and help shape work so that it is effective deliberate practice for people. You're going to have to learn to always explain why, even if it feels like arguing with a toddler. Why? Because, no, you have to really give answers. Don't hide behind best practice. Explain why it is, and if you don't know why it is, it's probably worth finding out. We're going to have to get good at AI ourselves. And I appreciate there's a wide range of willingness to do that. Some of us just don't have the time. Some of us don't think the tools are good enough yet to invest in. But folks in your teams are going to be using this whether you can or not. And so we're going to get left behind if we don't get good at it too. And then I think we also need to teach a healthy sense of paranoia. LLMs are wrong so often. Like, by their nature, that is not going to get better. Fundamentally, they are very, very advanced autocomplete. And so for, like Gergely said in his talk yesterday, if you have a novel problem, it's unlikely to help you. It's going to hallucinate. And so we have to teach paranoia. We have to teach people to check the sources, to check the documentation, to make sure that things actually add up. And I think healthy skepticism is something that's very useful for a career in engineering anyway. Not trusting that everything's working just because the graph seems to say it is. Not trusting that the answer is right just because somebody with authority said it, I think is very good and very healthy for all of us. And so, my conclusion here is there's a positive version and a negative version. The negative version, I took off the slides, but I've decided to share with you anyway. I did a pain management course in 2020. I've got a thing called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. All my joints dislocate. And so I hurt a lot. And at this pain management course, the key mantra was, pain is mandatory, but suffering is optional. And so that's one thought I will leave you with. But the more positive thought is, you can't hold back the ocean, but you can learn to surf. And I think that's the approach that we need to take to these changing times. It's not safe to sit on the beach and just hope that the waves go away. It's not sensible to go live in the water just yet, or probably ever. But you can learn to surf. And we can teach all of our senior engineers and above to navigate this in a better way, knowing that it's just going to be a completely different world for juniors and associates than we had when we were coming up. And so I want to say a quick thank you. I interviewed quite a lot of people for this, so thank you to all the senior and above engineers, to the associate and mid-levels, to the people in other industries, Lorraine and Ellie, and then a bunch of people jumped in on a big LinkedIn thread and helped as well, so I appreciate that. Howell did a great talk at a lead dev in San Francisco that I'd highly recommend watching, where he is really into the theory of learning and knows a lot more about it than me, and so I strongly suggest watching that. And there's a great talk from Maggie Appleton about how AI is turning the forest of the internet into a dark and foreboding place, and that's also really worth watching. But I leave you with this thought. We can't hold back the ocean, but we can learn to surf. So let's do that. Thank you very much.